What's up, guys? It's Dwayne back again for another video, back again for another reaction, and today's a great, wonderful day because it's a Swedish day, but not just a Swedish day. It's a Swedish prison day versus United States prison. How do they actually compare? Without further ado, let's get into this reaction. Let's go.
The United States has about 5% of the world's population, yet has a quarter of all the world's prisoners, with roughly 1 in every 100.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. The US has 5% of the world's population. Just 5%. And a quarter of the world's prisoners. How is that possible? There has to be something going on there. There's something wrong. 1 in every 107 American adults is behind bars. They're failing their people. They're failing their people. Like, it's just, it's not working. It's not working. And then sure, they have the most amount of policing in the whole of the United States. Like, percentage-wise. I'm making this up, but I think that's the case. So obviously what they're doing, how they're policing, how their social system works, it's not working. They need to sort it out.
107 American adults behind bars, with a crackdown on the war on drugs leading to harsh prison sentences, as well as no-tolerance policing. The American public has to ask itself if punishment is really working as intended. Well, while the two nations share vastly different demographics and thus different challenges, it isn't hard to take a look at some of Sweden's prison policies and practices to see that perhaps there's a better way for the US to handle its prison populations. America's prison population has been growing exponentially since after the Second World War. Yet it wasn't until the crack epidemic of the 1980s and the ensuing war on drugs that the US prison population really boomed. Federal and state legislation was quickly passed which dictated mandatory minimum sentences for any drug-related crime, all in a bid to make crime so unattractive that the harsh punishments would deter would-be criminals. Sadly, this seemed to have little effect, and all that US legislature really did was create a situation where first-time offenders were swept up into the main prison population and left there for years. This hardened the inmates' resolve and wisened them up criminally. Prison very quickly became known as Crime University because inexperienced first-time offenders would be sentenced to years and leave better able to commit the crimes they were originally sentenced for, mentored for years by the more experienced inmates. To make matters worse, American prisons have historically offered few opportunities for rehabilitation or ways for inmates to better themselves and lay the foundation for a different type of life once back on the outside.
There's something not right, is there? There's something not right. I think prison... Okay, this might be controversial, but I think if as a country they were losing money by having prisoners in prison, because I would have thought it's very expensive to have prisoners inside there and pay for those prisoners. I don't think the general population are paying for prisoners to be in prison. I think they're private, right? I think their prisons are private. So it must be making money somehow, or making them a lot of money, because if it's not in the best interest to have people in prison and it's expensive to do that, then they wouldn't have that many prisons and prisoners. But it must be making them money somehow. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
Side. By comparison though, in Sweden, public attitudes toward criminals are as hard as those in America. Swedish lawmakers have taken a far more humane approach to the treatment of prisoners. In Sweden, the collective view is that while crime must be punished, the individuals who commit these crimes will one day be rejoining society. And thus, prison represents less a tool for punishment and more a chance to reform an individual while removed from the general population.
And that's what prison's supposed to be.
Prisoners humanely is one of the first steps toward rehabilitation for the Swedish. In the US, many prisons run over capacity, and overall, the US is 103.9% over capacity. This leads to at times as many as 4 prisoners sharing a cell. And with many prison systems across the American states running over budget, the problem only gets worse as parts of prisons or even entire prisons are closed in a bid to save money. This leads to further overcrowding, which can directly affect the health and comfort of prisoners, which in turn leads to prisoner-on-prisoner violence and even riots.
So they're not. It's not economical then. If they're shutting prisons and prisons are overcrowded, then it can't be making them money. I don't understand why they haven't taken the steps to fix this, because it's not sustainable, is it? It's just going to get worse. Like, people are going to reoffend more people are going to be coming into prison, and prisons are going to get even more overcrowded, and there's going to be more friction between prisoners, and there's going to be people stabbing each other and drugs and all sorts of... They need to sort it out soon.
In the US, prisoner-on-prisoner violence is fairly common. Yet in Sweden, it's extremely rare. Even more rare are prison riots in Sweden. Perhaps that's because, by comparison, the Swedes focus on housing prisoners in what they consider humane conditions, which means affording each prisoner a level of comfort and safety by not exceeding crowd capacity. The fact that the Swedish prison population has dropped from 5,722 prisoners to 4,500 over the last 10 years has helped not just with crowding issues, but with budget issues, as wings of prisons or even entire prisons are closed down for a lack of need. There's also a general difference in the attitude of what prison is between the US and Sweden. With the US and its harsh sentencing guidelines, especially mandatory minimums for drug offenses, leading to a prison as a first resort mentality. In Sweden, prison is seen as a last resort, and the Swedish Penal Code actually tries to avoid prison terms when it can. Per Swedish guidelines, offenders must present an active threat to the general public if they're to qualify for prison time, as opposed to programs such as mandatory counseling, community service, or perhaps house arrest. Per the Swedish mentality, some people must be incarcerated. But even if they are, then it should be the goal of the state to release them back out into society in a better shape than they were when they first entered. Compare that to the US, which is firmly entrenched in a punishment mentality, with prisons slashing work release, education, and job skills programs. Some prisons have even forbidden inmates from being sent books by those on the outside, and restrict what reading materials inmates may order for themselves. A key focus of the Swedish prison system is seeing prisoners as individuals with psychological needs that need to be carefully attended to. Crime is not just an act in Sweden, but a consequence of an underlying social or
Sweden. I love you. I do. I mean, is there a lack of critical thinking in the US? Maybe there is. Because would you not think, oh, maybe there's a reason that they're going into prison? Maybe, just maybe, there's some underlying conditions, there's some underlying reasons, like what's happening at home? Who's in their household? Were they a foster kid? Did they have two parents? Were they from a low demographic? What type of opportunities did they have as a young person? Like, how can we help them? Do they have any mental health issues? Do they need a social worker? Do they need, instead of thinking of that, they're thinking, oh, bad person, must punish. Very sick, very just one-dimensional, very they've done wrong, so we're going to punish them. When are you going to release them? What's going to happen when you release them? If you put someone in a cage and you punish that person and they're locked in a cage, when they come out, they're going to come out a worse person, a worse human being. It's like a 10-year-old could figure this out. But America hasn't. I don't know.
Or psychological problem, and the prison system sees it as its responsibility to address these problems if it can. When you're considering the fact that these individuals will one day be released back into society as a whole, as the Swedish consider, then it makes perfect sense that prison shouldn't be about punishment, but about rehabilitation and treatment. To this end, Swedish prison guards fulfill both security roles and rehabilitative roles, and each prisoner has a contact officer who monitors the inmate's progress toward their eventual return to society. This helps prisoners see guards not just as, guards, but also as individuals who are trying to help prisoners live better lives once back on the outside. Compare that to the US, where 10 times more people with mental health issues are housed in prisons than in mental health hospitals. These people receive no treatment for their psychological problems and instead must cope with them on their own, with only occasional and very brief visits to a counselor if the budget affords it. Untreated mental health issues not only lead to violence in prison, but can grow exponentially worse in the highly stressful environment of prison and cripple an individual for life. severely limiting their ability to function outside of prison. In the US, crime is exactly that, just an activity, and no concern is paid for the economic or psychological motivations for that crime. Rather than try to address the root of a criminal problem, the US has for decades simply taken a weed whacker to the problem and left the roots in fertile soil, ready to regrow again. The focus in the US is on punishing people for their wrongs, either out of a sense of vengeance or under the false illusion that harsh punishments will work to deter crime, despite the fact that study after study has proven that this is a false conclusion. There is little to no concern placed on the fact that prisoners will one day return to society, and attempts to rehabilitate prisoners while there's a chance to are all but non-existent. Some prisons do offer job skills training and educational courses, but for the majority of American prisons, inmates are seen as tenants and little more. Prison guards fulfill one and only one duty in the US, and that's to keep inmates in line and punish offenders. Rather than build a protectorate relationship with inmates, prison guards in the US
prison guards is there to just traumatize them further. They're in there for an offense, and then they're going to put them in a cage and just torture them. That's basically what they're doing, is torturing them. That makes no sense. You know, it's like, it is the analogy of an animal, like a dog. You have a dog, you know, it's the you know when people say it's the owners, not the pets. So if you have a pet, a dog that's really aggressive, that dog shouldn't be put down. Well, if it's very, very dangerous, then yeah. But like, it's the owner's fault. It's not the dog's fault. It's the way the pet has been raised. It's the same with a prisoner, not calling them an animal or anything, but if you treat them like human beings and give them that support, then they can change. Most prisoners can change. But if you do this, you're gonna create the worst prisoners ever. The worst people to be released back into society. And some of them won't be able to be released because you made them worse, so they keep reoffending in prison, and then their population is just growing and growing and growing. I don't understand why it hasn't been fixed. There's no one trying to fix this in America.
The US are built solely as tools of punishment by a penal system that cares little for the individual. This is likely why incidents of violence against prison guards is so high in the US and so low in Sweden. One of the most controversial practices of the Swedish prison system, however, is the use of low-security open prisons, which are in many ways exactly what they sound like. Here, prisoners live in housing that resembles a dorm and have free access to TVs and other forms of entertainment. Individuals are also allowed to commute to a job and even visit families, all the while being electronically monitored. Prison staff and prisoners all eat together in community spaces, and the inmates do not wear uniforms. Per the Swedish, this open prison system is more effective than closed prisons in reducing recidivism, or the rate at which freed prisoners repeat offenses and are re-jailed. Inmates have strict curfews to follow and have many rules imposed on them and their behavior. Their trips outside of the prison are closely monitored, and inmates know that they're always just one infraction away from being sent to a regular, closed prison. Yet the Swedes contend that by treating prisoners ethically and fairly, even granting them a degree of autonomy, they're far less likely to recommit an offense once released. The focus is once more on humane treatment and correcting bad behavior, as well as building a prisoner's chances for a successful life outside of prison. That might sound naive to American prison officials, and yet the numbers don't lie.
The numbers don't lie. It might sound naive to other people, but I mean, if you guys have the lowest percentage of prison population, then obviously you're doing something correctly, and there's obviously something to be learned from the rest of the world, especially America.
A shrinking prison population while the US is growing, but its recidivism rate is at 29% after 3 years. The US, meanwhile, has a recidivism rate of 67.8% after 3 years. Clearly, a focus on treating prisoners humanely.
Recidivism, I think that means people that go back into prison, right?
And treating psychological and other issues while building life skills is working to make Sweden a safer place, and are things that the United States could learn from. Do you love strange, unexpected stories that defy belief but are completely true?
I think that's the end of the... it is. That was really random. It is not even a goodbye, not even an ending, just like let's talk about something else. Well, that was really interesting. I'd like to see, I've seen a bit of Finnish prison, like the inside of a Finnish prison. I wonder if there's anything on YouTube where I can see inside of a Swedish prison or see the way that Swedish prisoners are treated. Because this is like an animated video, so it's not the same as seeing something in real life. It was really, really good, and I really firmly believe that prisoners need rehabilitation. They don't need punishing as such, because it's just counterproductive. You know, if someone's done something wrong, someone's done something bad, there's always an underlying reason to that problem. There's always an underlying reason why that person is doing what they're doing. Most people prefer to just live their lives and not be incarcerated. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching. Until the next one, I will see you very soon.